Welcome into this crossover Thursday Locked On Bears, Locked On Commanders podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm Lorin Cox from Locked On Bears alongside Chris Russell from Locked On Washington Commanders, getting ready for a Thursday night football matchup between two teams that I'm sure much of the rest of the league isn't super thrilled about being in this primetime matchup. But Chris, I think this game has to be better than what we saw last Thursday on primetime with no touchdowns in that one. You think we can get a touchdown in this game?
I'm hopeful, Lorin. Good to be with you as always. Been a while since these two teams meet up or have met up, is what he wanted to say. I think we'll get a touchdown. I hope. Don't know which team it will come from. I don't know if it'll be more than one, but listen. As Kirk Herbstreit basically eloquently said last Thursday night during that Denver-Indianapolis game when Al Michaels basically set him up with a softball and just said, like every game is kind of pretty in its own nature. He goes, you know what I mean? And Herbstreit was like, nope. and I mean, like there's so many adages we can use about, putting lipstick on a pig and all that stuff, right? That probably summarizes, quite honestly, at least the feeling going in from a Washington perspective, I can tell you. And I don't know exactly from a Chicago perspective. At least you've got the young quarterback, who has struggled, but seemingly maybe is making a little bit of progress in year two. Around here, Lorin, it's more of the same.
Yeah, what has been more of the same? What does that look like? What's sort of the big storyline for Washington? I know 4 losses in a row, but how have they gotten to this point?
Yeah, well, so you win one to start out, and the offense looks really good at the beginning and the end of the game, and sandwiched in around a bunch of nothing, a bunch of terrible play in that same game, right? Which kind of summarizes to me everything that Carson Wentz's career has turned out to be. There's a lot of highs, and then there's a lot of lows, and then there's a lot of stuff in between that isn't really pretty, right? And of course, everybody wants more highs and nobody expects perfection, but he's a huge part of the reason, as most quarterbacks are, why they're 1-4. Now, that being said, again, there have been some great highs. There have been some moments where everything you want Carson Wentz to be, he's been. But there's been far too many of the low lows and a lot of mediocre to bad, even if it's not at its lowest. He's one interception shy. If he throws an interception on Thursday night, Lorin, that ties his mark for all of last year in 17 games with the Colts, with the Commanders, and this is game number 6, right? Because they're 1-4, right? Game number 6. So one interception on Thursday night ties that mark from all of last year, all 17 games he played in Indy. So that should kind of give you a little bit of an indication. And then everything else, quite honestly, has been mishmash, right? The offensive line has been terrible for the most part. The running game's been up and down. The defense has been much better of late, not perfect, much better of late. The special teams are kind of sloppy and disjointed. So big picture, and that's just the on-field product. The coaching and the game planning and the strategy and the front office is heavily under fire, as you could imagine, here in Washington.
Yeah, we all heard the quotes, I think, from Ron Rivera that were seemingly a little bit out of context, that what separates your team from the rest, the right quarterback position. And I know he went on to sort of talk about building around the quarterback and having the supporting cast for the quarterback, and that it wasn't clearly the shot at Carson Wentz solely that I think the out of context quote had it be. But that's really, I think, the storyline for the Bears coming into this game too, right? It is the quarterback. And despite the 2-3 record and the loss last week, back-to-back losses for this Bears team, they're coming into Thursday feeling about as hopeful as Bears fans have, because that performance against the Vikings represented some of the most consistent play we've seen from Justin Fields, and represented the type of growth that Bears fans have been looking for from Justin Fields up to this point in his career, despite some of the same things Wentz is dealing with in terms of a lack of a supporting cast. I mean, Wentz certainly has better receivers that he's working with there, but I know they've had some offensive line troubles, and that has been a contributing factor. The Bears certainly don't have a lot to help their quarterback be in the best position to be successful, and yet last week especially in that second half. He goes 12 of 13 for 135 yards in that half and a touchdown, and really looked the most comfortable, the most in rhythm, had decent pass protection. Receivers made some plays, and it was like, okay, this is a little bit of that proof of concept. Like, this is what someday it's supposed to look like more consistently. Not that the Bears are expecting it to be like that every single week, and that this team is not going to start winning a bunch of games and all of a sudden go on some deep playoff run or anything like that. But okay, it's sort of reminding you that, yes, there is still something here. There is still something to be unlocked. And now everyone's waiting to see, do they continue it against the Commanders in this game, or was it just something about the Vikings matchup that worked well? And can the Commanders then come back and maybe, blitz a little bit more, be more aggressive, or do different things to disrupt Justin Fields and disrupt some of that growth along the way in this process? So I think,
yeah, and I think that's great points based on what I've seen so far. And with the short week, of course, everybody's crunched for the ability to really, advance scout or advance look. But I did see a more confident Justin Fields than I've seen. I mean, I saw. Well, here's my question to you. How much did David Montgomery being back and the ability to not only run, which we saw for the touchdown and what have you, but also the ability to screen, how much did that help, do you think, settle Justin Fields down as they were trying to make that comeback and ultimately, get back in that game in Minnesota?
Yeah, I will say certainly David Montgomery emotionally is kind of the engine of this offense. Like, Fields is definitely the face and the leader of it, but like the sort of like energy and hustle and determination, like David Montgomery represents a lot of that in this offense. Because like overall, they weren't running the ball super, super well against Minnesota, but like he had a 3rd and 8 run for a touchdown, and like he had a third and short run again. Like, he's able to like convert a couple of the really important, difficult situations where they hand it off and just let a physical player go be physical and lead the team that way. So I do think there's something to that. They were able to run the ball well with his backup Khalil Herbert, and I think a lot of what happened against Minnesota is they get down 18 and just need to throw and need to sort of open things up and need to get things going in a rhythm, and less of that pressure to like really kind of force everything and say, you know what, we're down 18. Let's just play. Let's just get some points. Let's put one thing after another and really kind of move things down the field. And there's just a relaxed nature of it, that everything kind of fell into rhythm a little bit more. And some of that goes to getting the ball to Dave Montgomery in the passing game, in the screens, like you said, and also some of those key hard runs where it's just they need a play and he's able to step up and make it and give that offense a little more confidence in itself.
And I'll just add this real quick on Montgomery and the screen game specifically. Washington has been pretty good at stuff in the run the last 3 weeks. Even though Derrick Henry got just over 100 yards, they limited him to like 3.6 yards per carry or whatever it was. It was really one drive where he had a couple of big carries, but where he hurt them a little bit and where Tennessee, Washington's last opponent, hurt them was in that screen game. So that's why I brought that up with Montgomery. They had back-to-back screens for like a combined 40 yards to Henry and the other running back in Tennessee, which led to it, which was a touchdown on that second of the back-to-backers. And then Henry had another screen down inside the 10-yard line that set up Henry's second touchdown. So again, I think that maybe while Washington did a pretty good job taking away the run, there's always a leak somewhere, right? There's always a leak. There's always something that you can find if you have any clue on offense to kind of exploit something, and maybe that's it. And with Montgomery back, maybe that's something to look forward to if you're a Bears fan.
Yeah, you don't want to have those kind of lapses in your defense on your football team, and you certainly don't want to have any sort of lapses in your defense when it comes to your home. And our friends at SimpliSafe are here to help keep your home security up to the absolute best and be that defense for your home when it comes to burglars and any other threats. SimpliSafe has 24/7 professional monitoring with agents that call you the moment a threat is detected, and they can dispatch police or first responders in an emergency, even if you're not home or you can't be reached. SimpliSafe blankets your home in protection with advanced sensors for every room, window, and door. Plus, you can get HD security cameras for inside and outside your home to have smarter ways to detect motion that only alert you when a threat is real. Their monitoring experts use proprietary advanced response technology to visually confirm when a break-in is real, so you can get the highest priority dispatch. Customize the perfect defense for your home in just a few minutes at simplisafe.com/lockedonnfl. Save 20% on your SimpliSafe security system when you sign up for an interactive monitoring plan and get your first month free. Visit simplisafe.com/lockedonnfl to learn more. There's no safe like SimpliSafe. Chris, it's safe to say in a matchup like this crossover Thursday, Locked On Bears, Locked On Commanders, there's going to be some of these key matchups that end up determining a game like this. We know both of these teams have plenty of weaknesses that the opponent can try and take advantage of, but easier said than done. Where do you look at from a Washington standpoint that, if Washington can win here, this is going to be what can put them over the top?
Well, you look back at that game, against the Vikings and Kirk Cousins, and obviously different quarterback, but it almost seemed like the first half was a lot of pitch and catch, soft coverage, not wanting to get beat over the top. That's not necessarily Carson Wentz's strength, Lorin. And he is dealing with a little bit. He's limited. He'll play a little bit of a bumped up shoulder, right? So that's not necessarily his strength to just play pitch and catch and take the easy stuff. But I think because they've had so many offensive line issues, and because Carson holds on to the ball, that will be a big part of the game plan, right? It worked for Kirk Cousins in Minnesota, kind of take advantage, especially if you get, again, too deep coverage, if you get soft looks where, you maybe make a side adjustment at the line of scrimmage, run a quick little come back, maybe a little hook, maybe a slant, that type of thing. So I want to see that. I think you can take advantage of that. And then maybe when the Bears start jumping up and maybe anticipating some of that and start, kind of expecting that, that's when you can hit Dyami Brown, who broke out last Sunday against Tennessee with 2 touchdowns, including a 75-yarder off of a deep under center play action. Or you could open things up for Terry McLaurin, who also can hurt you deep, and maybe Curtis Samuel to some degree. But Curtis Samuel is really good at that underneath stuff at this point in his career. I think those are the 2 guys that obviously can hurt you. Dyami Brown, who's limited as well in practice so far this week, and Terry McLaurin, assuming that Jahan Dotson, the rookie, does not play. By the time people watch this, he might already be ruled out. He's expected, David's my partner. Sorry. He's expected, Lorin, to be out of Thursday night's game along with Logan Thomas, right? So basically what I'm getting at is if Chicago plays soft early and Carson Wentz can play pitch and catch, then that should open things up over the top, ultimately off of play action, off of some 7-step drops where I think they can take advantage of that. And then I also wonder, Brian Robinson is now going to play in his 2nd game in the NFL. It was kind of mystery meat, quite honestly, on Sunday. They didn't know what exactly to expect. And now I think they have a better feel for him. So I think he will be the primary ball carrier over Antonio Gibson on Thursday night. And we'll see what kind of pop that gives him and gives them, especially on outside zone runs.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point, especially with the receivers there, that this Bears secondary has been, especially the cornerback position, has been among the more vulnerable spots across this team, in large part because the leader of Jalen Johnson has been out the last 2 games. Now, full disclosure, we're recording this crossover Thursday podcast a little bit earlier in the week because it's such a tight, condensed week. Right. So we're not seeing the final injury reports, depending on when you're listening to this. But the Bears have said they generally expect Jalen Johnson to probably make his return to this game, which then bumps everybody else down the depth chart another notch, which should help a little bit. But still, Kindle Wilder on the opposite side has taken some steps forward this season, and it's left the rookie Kyler Gordon, the 2nd-round pick in the slot, as kind of the weak link there that other teams have attacked more often than not. Now, with Johnson out, they were going after Johnson's replacement a little bit more, but it's been a bumpy start for a guy like Gordon. And so when you have a trio over there like McLaurin, and if Dotson's able to go, and of course Curtis Samuel, now you mentioned Dyami Brown also getting in there, like that's not a bad set of receivers in terms of being able to be a productive group there for Carson Wentz, and they can find some plus matchups in there one-on-one. It's been a big matter of whether or not the Chicago Bears pass rush has been able to get home. And last week they struggled with a lot of that against Carson Wentz in the first half. Seemed like they got a little more aggressive with some stunts, some blitzes, some twists in the second half. Not a lot of blitzing. It's not a heavy blitz defense by any means, but there were a couple times they would bring pass rushers from slightly different areas and got Kirk Cousins a little less comfortable. And I imagine they'll look to do something similar against Carson Wentz to try and disrupt some things on that side. And I'm curious really to see how the Commanders take that approach with Justin Fields, because the Vikings really laid off him and just did 4-man rushes. And that was why he was able to look the most comfortable in the pocket, I think, than we've seen him maybe in his whole career, certainly this season so far. And it was a stark contrast to 2 weeks ago against the Giants when that Wink Martindale defense blitzed him over and over and over again. And he was constantly on the run and constantly on the move. And it seems to me when I look at this Commanders defense that some of that strength is on that defensive line with a couple of great guys on the interior in Allen and Payne. And then, of course, on the edge with Montez Sweat. And I'm particularly worried about Jonathan Allen versus the Bears left guard, Lucas Patrick. That interior has been weaker, I think, than the exterior of the Bears offensive line. And if that pressure's up in Justin Fields' face, it's a little bit harder for him to be as dynamic of an athlete if he has to sort of go down and around the pocket and turn around. It can really disrupt the timing of this Bears offense.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. That's, a key matchup, clearly. And you're right about Jonathan Allen. He's really, really good. Even if the sack numbers don't always automatically tell you that. He lit up Ryan Tannehill on a third down on the first series of last Sunday's loss for Washington. And, he's so good, so explosive. Daron Payne is in a contract year, having a tremendous year. You mentioned Montez Sweat. He broke out. He had a bunch of pressures and hurries, but he hadn't had a sack until Sunday. Had 2, should have had 3. So that is certainly an area where if the Commanders are going to win this game, of course, that's where it's going to come from. The question for me is, will they blitz Justin Fields a lot, like you mentioned, what Wink Martindale and the Giants did a couple of weeks ago? Now, that's Wink's style anyway. I don't know if he did that specifically for Justin Fields. I think you are what you are, right? Jack Del Rio doesn't like to blitz a lot. He did blitz, I think it was 7th most last year in the NFL over the course of the year, Lorin. Because they lost Chase Young and Montez Sweat, they had to generate more pressure in the second half of the season, but that also is what helped them go on a 4-game winning streak. So I think what he's going to do is play, of course, more cover 3, more conservative defense, try and rush 4, get home with 4. He'll occasionally blitz Jamin Davis, the former first-round pick linebacker who's been a little up and down and all over the place. He'll occasionally blitz Cole Holcomb, their Mike linebacker. They play a lot with just 2 linebackers on the field, sometimes just 1. They'll blitz those guys occasionally, but they won't send the house. They won't send a lot of corners and safeties, I don't think, at Justin Fields unless Fields is carving them up. And that brings us to the fact that he can carve them up because this defense gives up huge, enormous plays and chunks of yardage. And look, I know Pettis had a drop early in the game last week and maybe another one, that was called a drop. I didn't think it was a drop. St. Brown, obviously, the other St. Brown killed this Washington defense. Maybe his brother can certainly get after it. Again, Montgomery in the screen game, all of that. I think opportunities are going to be there. This secondary for Washington, again, has given up huge chunks of yardage, huge plays, including a 62-yarder against Bobby McCain, their free safety, last week to a very pedestrian offense. So the Bears are going to have opportunities in this game. Whether they connect on them, that's a whole different story. Oh, and one last thing, Washington doesn't generate any turnovers. Lorin, I'll give you another one. They haven't generated a turnover on defense since the end of week 1. No turnovers. None. 4 straight games with no takeaways. And the one that they have, quite honestly, was fortunate. I'll just label it at that. First of all, it should have been wiped out because of a roughing the passer. And secondly, it was just a desperate heave by Trevor Lawrence. Otherwise, they would have 0 turnovers. Or takeaways, I should say.
Yeah. Well, those opportunities are it'll be interesting to see how these teams are able to take advantage of the opportunities that are presented for them. And I think it's a great way to kind of test that yourselves with our friends at PrizePicks, the better way to do daily fantasy football, because you're not competing against other players. It's you versus the projections available. You pick 2 to 5 players, and if they'll score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, and you can win up to 10 times your money on any entry. Right now, their projections are Terry McLaurin at 58.5 receiving yards, Darnell Mooney at 43.5, Carson Wentz at 227 passing yards, Justin Fields at only 165. So the projections are going to be low passing all around, and that's where you can win your money with our friends at PrizePicks, not just for Bears Commanders, but any of your sporting events, baseball playoffs, upcoming basketball season, hockey, golf, college sports, you name it. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. And when you're ready to withdraw, it's safe, fast, and easy. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with our promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter promo code Locked On at sign-up for an instant deposit match up to $100. Our crossover Thursday Locked On Bears, Locked On Commanders continues. Lorin Cox with Chris Russell. And it's time, Chris, to get into some predictions for these games. I think we both agree it's going to be not necessarily pretty football. And I think those PrizePicks projections tell you they're not necessarily expecting big time yardage and big time offense. So where do you fall on how this game plays out?
Well, I do think it'll be a lower scoring game, right? Let's start there. Where exactly? I mean, it's hard to tell because, again, it depends on takeaways, field position, all that. Here's what I know. Again, mention that the Washington defense does not generate a lot of takeaways. Mention that their special teams are very spotty. Carson Wentz is, again, up, down. He's certainly capable of lighting up the Chicago sky at Soldier Field on Thursday night. He's also capable of throwing 3 interceptions, quite honestly, and a couple of fumbles and a couple of intentional grounding. That's another thing that he does a lot. Intentional groundings, 3 already this year, and has I think it's 7 fumbles and maybe only 1 lost. He's recovered a bunch of fumbles of his own. Some center has been terrible. So, Lorin, I don't expect on the Washington end a prolific scoring output by any stretch of the imagination, even though what you said about the Bears pass rush and their secondary. I need to see them execute consistently, and they rarely do. A little bit here, not enough. So for me, I don't see Washington topping 20 in this game. That might be enough to get them the win. That might be enough, but until I see it, I can't put it in my mind that Washington's just going to stroll in on a short week, beat up, and lacking a lot of confidence. You mentioned the controversy between Ron Rivera and Carson Wentz. I mean, I don't know how that's going to affect, but maybe Wentz struggles for accuracy because his shoulder is not feeling right. I see Washington under 20 in this game.
Yeah, I just pulled up our friends at BetOnline. They have the spread for this one as a pick 'em, just straight up pick 'em. Right. And the over-under is 37.5, which is by far the lowest scoring game.
Well, that opened up with the Bears -1 on Sunday night, and the over-under was at 40, Lorin. So it's come down from 40 to 37 as we speak here midweek and 48 hours-ish before this game. And again, people can be watching and listening at a different time. I'm talking about you and me. So America thinks, right, or the public thinks that this game is going to be a woof, kind of affair.
Yeah, I'm expecting a lot of field goals like last Thursday, but I'm praying for at least a touchdown on each side, just to give us something to watch for. Right. Yeah, I'm with you that I certainly don't see the Bears coming in here and just blowing out the Commanders by any means. Like there's neither of these teams is going to come in and go up 28-0 or anything like that. I will say the Bears have been a second half team thoroughly this season. Every game in the first half, there have been these disaster feeling of nothing is going right and the team is going the completely wrong direction and is the worst team in the NFL. And then they've had a bunch of second halves where they look like you're like, oh, maybe this team could go on a run and go to the playoffs. And obviously the truth, I think, lies somewhere in the middle there. And so, I think it'll start out with the Commanders and Wentz maybe doing a few things early on. And you're like, okay, maybe they figured some things out this week. And then second half, Bears kind of keep pressing and kind of wear them down on a short week and ultimately climb back. And whether or not they're losing and have to make it a comeback or whether it's tied for a lot of the game, I think I'm going to go with a Bears victory here. And if I had to put a score on it, 20-17, something like that. I mean, it's not going to be a big gulf between these teams, but some 17-14, although I would say 4 touchdowns. So that might be tough. Maybe 16-13 where each team gets a 1, but then a bunch of field goals around it. I don't know.
I actually had a question before I give my prediction. How's the Bears special teams looking, right? Because they have first-year special teams coordinator with them, Richard Hightower, right?
Yes. So rookie punter has been very good for a rookie punter. Cairo Santos, the kicker, has been solid. He missed a game a week ago, and the replacement was really good. Return game has been okay. They had a bad muff against the Giants that cost them a comeback. But other than that, it's been pretty steady. Last week, they just did their first surprise onside kick and didn't get it. But overall, been tackling fairly well and haven't given up any kind of dangerous returns just yet.
That's interesting because, Rich came over from San Francisco where he's with Kyle Shanahan, for a long time, and they struggled on special teams. And I worked with Rich for 4 years here in Washington, and he's one of the best people I, know in this industry. And he's a good coach. I mean, I was curious, from what I could see, it certainly looked like a decent operation so far. But I'm curious as to how that might be in effect because Washington has had simply no return game. Their blocking is terrible, kick and punt return. And now Antonio Gibson might be the primary kick returner on Thursday night. So that's a little something to watch out for. But their blocking and scheming has been awful in that regard, no matter who has been the kick returner all the way back to the start of the preseason. And then on top of that, Tress Way struggled, who's normally a really good punter for them. He struggled on Sunday. So something to look out for. And Joey Sly's been up and down. I think special teams are going to be a bigger factor in this game than anybody will ever talk about. I give the edge to the Bears, Lorin. And because of that, I'll just go ahead and give my prediction. I'm going to say the Bears 17 and the Commanders 13.
I didn't realize both kicker and punter for the Commanders, former Chicago Bears. They both got their start. They're both training camp, not heroes, but training camp names we remember from yesteryear.
I remember when Tress Way signed with the then other name that I can't say on this show. I was in Tampa when he showed up, and I said, "Oh, you're the guy they just signed from the Bears." And you're right, Joey Sly too. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be, hopefully it's the most exciting 17-13 game we can get on a Thursday night. I know that's a low bar, but I know we're both just rooting for both teams to not add to their injury list and maybe some kind of game that's worth watching for a full.
Give us something entertaining for our chili cheese dip or whatever dip and hors d'oeuvres you're going to have on the menu for Thursday night.
Absolutely. I want to thank everyone for tuning into this crossover Thursday podcast and making either Locked On Commanders or Locked On Bears your first listen each and every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team every day. If you're looking for your second listen, check out the other podcast. If you want more intel on your team's opponent this week, if you're a Commanders fan, check out Locked On Bears. If you're a Bears fan, check out Locked On Commanders and get everything you need to know about your team's opponent for this Thursday night matchup. And then come on back to both shows on Friday for our recaps on what happens on Thursday night. It's going to do it for Chris Russell from Locked On Commanders. I'm Lorin Cox from Locked On Bears, and we will talk to you tomorrow.